and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we have the case of Tina Watson, and let me tell you right now, it's a really long one. In fact, it's one of the longest cases I've ever covered on the channel so far. It's a pretty interesting case from start to finish, so it's probably gonna spark some discussion. We'll see in the comments what you all think about this case once it's over. On another note, up here you'll find my playlist with the rest of the cases on the channel in case you want to keep watching. You already know if you like this kind of content. You can recommend more cases to me down in the comments, and of course they'll show up there in that list you see on the screen. There's an I somewhere. Just click it and you'll find the rest of the cases then. Down here you'll find my social media in case you want to follow me on any of them. And I think I don't have anything else to add about all this. Like I said, it's a long one, so if you want, go grab a coffee or something like that, because we're gonna be here for a while. So, alright, let's get started. The woman you're seeing right now is Tina Watson. She was born on February 13, 1977, in Germany before moving to the United States when she was just a baby. On January 24, 1980, she was legally adopted by Tony and Cindy Thomas. She spent her childhood in Walker, Alabama with her parents and her younger sister, Alonda. They moved to Louisiana for a while, and later settled in Birmingham, also in Alabama, during the 90s. Tina was cheerful, had a beautiful smile, and was very close to her family, but her life wasn't perfect. From a very young age, she suffered from a heart condition called PSVT. Generally speaking, it could cause fainting, seizures, and could even be fatal. For a while, she tried to manage this condition with medication, but since it didn't make much of a difference, she decided to have surgery in 2001. This was supposed to be a surgery that would make her much better, and she decided to do it at age 24. This surgery finally eased all her symptoms and almost completely resolved her condition. Tina had her first relationship during her teenage years, which continued into adulthood where she got engaged. However, this engagement didn't last long and ended when she turned 23. After ending that engagement, she decided to get into another relationship, which lasted 3 years, but again, they broke up. It was then, shortly after that last relationship, that she met Gabe Watson around 2001. The man you're seeing right now is Gabe Watson, or David Gabriel Watson. He went to high school at Hoover High School. Most of his time there was pretty typical. He played sports, but it wasn't until his senior year that he decided to really focus on basketball. After high school, he finished his studies at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. And his family and friends described him as someone who didn't cause much trouble, had a good sense of humor, was very funny, but also laid back. They met at the university in Birmingham and officially started dating, as I mentioned before, in 2001, after Tina became single again. It was later, after a New Year's Eve party, that Tina decided to give him a chance and start dating him. A very important detail for this story is that Gabe loved scuba diving. It was one of his favorite hobbies. In fact, he decided to share it with Tina, and Tina seemed somewhat happy about this hobby. Although her friends said that she actually didn't like these kinds of things. She didn't like scuba diving or these types of sports, but, well, it seemed like Tina liked it because Gabe liked it. So in 2003, she decided to tell her parents that she would be taking scuba diving lessons with Dave. She wanted to share this activity with him. She really liked that they were doing something together, and she told them about it. Her parents told her they were worried, but she, very sure of herself, told them that everything would be fine. They really didn't want Tina to end up in the hospital, or even worse, but they had to let her go since, well, it seemed like it made her happy. And one of the most important details to highlight at this point is that her parents also didn't like the way Dave behaved. Let's just say he didn't really care much about the condition Tina had, and he wasn't too concerned about the possibility that this sport could be bad for her. In fact, every time they tried to talk to him about it, he would just act like nothing was wrong, brush off the topic, and simply move on to other things. Gabe proposed to Tina in 2001. While his family was very happy about the engagement, since they had come to see Tina as their own daughter, Tina's family wasn't so pleased, mainly because of Gabe's attitude. Honestly, they didn't have many good things to say about him. She knew this perfectly well, but even so, she decided to accept Gabe's proposal and get engaged to him. So the wedding date was set for October 2003. Shortly before the wedding, Tina went to visit her father, Tommy, to tell him that she wanted to increase her life insurance. She went to her father because he had been working in the life insurance business for many years of his life. He was still in that business, he knew a lot about it, so it would be easy for him to change her life insurance and make it higher. Knowing so much about the subject, Tommy was concerned that his daughter wanted to change her life insurance to a higher one. He really wondered what had made her change her mind. First of all, Tina wasn't worried about her condition, since she really thought the surgery had helped her a lot. So he asked her what was going on and why she wanted to change it. To which she replied that Gabe had told her to increase her life insurance and also to make him the sole beneficiary, since now that they were getting married, that's how things should be. Obviously, Tommy didn't like this at all. He suspected something was up with the whole situation. It didn't seem normal to him. So he told Tina that since the insurance still needed to be updated in a few months, they would wait until then to make all the changes. Tina was still worried about what she would tell Gabe about it, so her father told her to just say that everything was taken care of and that she already had the life insurance set up the way he wanted. That was the end of the matter. However, the families, and especially Tommy, now that he saw this side of Gabe, were at odds. Let's just say they didn't get along at all, and in fact, there were quite a few disagreements during the wedding. Despite the bad blood, these two people still got married on October 11th, 2003. And let's just say that most things went well. The last time Tommy, Tina's father, saw his daughter was during the wedding reception. He was lucky enough to drive her to the wedding, so he had the whole ride to tell her how much he loved her and how much he truly wanted her to know that he supported her in whatever she chose. On the way, he also told her that if she wasn't sure about getting married, she could call it off right then and there. Tina was very sure that she wanted to marry Gabe, so she simply told him that was what she wanted to do and nothing else. Her father decided to support her and walk her to the wedding. During the reception, he managed to catch up with her while she was still in the elevator leaving. He told her that he loved her and also managed to tell Gabe to take good care of her. This was ultimately the last moment Tommy had to cherish with his daughter. It was the last moment in which he could tell her how much he loved her and that he truly hoped she would take care of herself on the honeymoon and that he wished everything would go well. After that moment, everything went downhill. The honeymoon would be in Australia. The plan for the honeymoon was to visit the Great Barrier Reef, a perfect reef for diving, and one that Gabe had actually hoped to visit for many years of his life. Tina knew about this, so she suggested they go there for their honeymoon because she wanted to share it with him, and Gabe, since he had been waiting his whole life to take this trip, told her it was a great idea. So they got tickets for a honeymoon in Australia. For the trip, Gabe bought a 7-day diving package with the company Mike Ball Dive Expeditions. This package was a cruise with 25 dives at very touristy spots and places well known among divers of all kinds. A few days before the trip, Gabe's dive computer, a device you wear on your wrist specifically for diving, broke. It's worth mentioning that this is a very important piece of equipment when diving, since it contains all the possible information you might need. Let's just say that without this little computer, going down while diving is pretty dangerous, since you lose a lot of information and really useful alerts, so it needed to be fixed before the trip. So he decided to send the device to a repair shop he had known for years. At this place, they told him that the batteries were in backwards, and that's why the device wasn't working properly. Now, I want to clarify something here, which is that this wrist device would still work even if the battery was in backwards. The thing is, it just didn't work right. The alarms wouldn't go off, they wouldn't sound, something weird like that. But anyway, let's just say that an average person wouldn't notice unless they took out the battery and put it back in. Supposedly then, the problem was completely fixed, so they decided to go on their trip. 2 days went by, and they began the long journey to Sydney. For this, they had to make a few stops in order to fly to Australia. Once there, they decided to see all the tourist spots they could. They went all over the place for a few days until the cruise finally began. From what it seemed, judging by the photos they had taken and what they told their friends over the phone, everything was fine. They seemed happy. So now I have to start with the day when everything happened, when they finally boarded the cruise. It was October 21st, and the couple was in Townsville. That's where they would board the catamaran that would take them diving for 7 days. The cruise ship left Townsville at 10 p.m. and began heading toward its first stop, the wreck of the SS John Gala. As the crew set sail, the newlyweds went to their cabin to unpack a few things, especially the diving gear that would be so important during this trip. Once they finished, they would attend the welcome event and later give a brief interview with the trip director. Something absolutely necessary for the company and for the travelers to ensure that the whole trip would be pleasant and safe. Normally, this interview is done separately due to company policy. Let's just say it didn't matter if they were married, each person had to do this separately at their own time. Even so, Gabe and Tina insisted on doing the interview together.
Why?
We really don't know. I don't know if it was Gabe who insisted, or if it was Tina, or if it was a mutual decision. But somehow, both of them insisted on doing it together, and they managed to make it happen. The truth is, the trip director is pretty important in this matter, as is the way the company handles all of this. He was Wade Singleton, who said that during the interview, he was able to determine that Gabe was an experienced diver, and therefore didn't need any help to go down. Gabe had gone diving more than 50 times in different ways, while Tina wasn't experienced at all. She was just starting out, had only taken a few classes, and some of those had even ended abruptly, so she was clearly going to need help. So this trip director, Wade, decided to tell them that she needed to take a few more classes, that she needed at least an orientation class before she could go down to the Yongala, so he recommended that they do that. However, the couple said they wanted to go down together and didn't want any orientation class, saying it wasn't necessary. Just to clarify, Gabe was certified to rescue people. He was certified to dive to depths like those of the Yongala, but he wasn't certified to be anyone's guide. He wasn't an instructor, he wasn't a teacher, nothing like that. Just to clarify, teacher is a type of diver, let's say, someone with more experience than Gabe, which he clearly didn't have, and it's a different kind of certification from what I understand. The director decided to insist a bit more on the orientation, but they chose not to take it and just left it at that. So they made a quick plan for what they were going to do and let them go without any further warnings. During the hours they spent there, they met two other couples who were more experienced than they were and had many more years of diving. They were Paula and Ken Snyder, and Doug and Ginger Milson. Both couples described Tina as a kind and happy girl, very affectionate. However, when it came to Gabe, while he seemed friendly and in good spirits, he was still a bit distant. They really didn't have a bad impression of him. He was just quiet and kept his distance from all of them. Even so, they made them part of the group, got together, chatted, and shared diving experiences. The boat didn't arrive at the diving area until the next day, around 6:30 a.m. An hour later, the passengers started having breakfast. The plan itself was pretty simple. The divers would go down along a line, a small rope, to the shipwreck. There, they would check out the area, see whatever the instructors pointed out to them, and then come back up to the surface. Nothing extremely difficult or too complicated. In fact, they had specific instructions on where to stop in order to manage all the pressure issues. So let's say that anyone with even a little bit of experience could do it, as long as they stayed calm and followed all the instructions. Like I said before, the trip was perfectly well instructed. However, later on, we'll find out that there were a few safety measures that weren't fully respected. Shortly before heading out again, the trip director decided to tell the group to do the orientation, at least for Tina to show up, so she would at least know where she needed to stop, where the emergency stops were, where she had to rest, and to see if she could really handle herself underwater. Let's remember, it's not the same to take diving classes in a pool in Alabama as it is to be out in the ocean. Therefore, an orientation class would have been the right thing to do. However, Gabe and Tina once again turned down the invitation and said they would always be together and that the two of them would go down alone. However, there's something that needs to be explained. In diving, there's a very important rule. If two people go down, those two people must stay together the entire time. And Gabe was certified in rescue, so even though he couldn't be an instructor, he could still act in case of an emergency if something happened to Tina. But again, the most important thing was that they stayed together at all times. No one was left behind. The couple got ready from head to toe in their diving suits, had everything set to go, and were even already in the water. when suddenly Gabe noticed that once again his wrist device was malfunctioning. So he got out of the water and told Tina to do the same. He went with a member of the team to see if they could help him and figure out what was wrong with the device. The person Gabe went to check the problem with thought he was referring to the device not registering the tank pressure, so he relaxed a bit and told Gabe it was just a minor issue that wasn't very important. They took out the battery, put it in the right way, and it seemed like the problem was finally solved once again. Tina, on her end, seemed to have trouble descending, so she needed more weight, and that's what she did. She got a vest with more integrated weight, which apparently ended up being a mistake. However, at that moment, it's not clear whose idea it was. Let's just say that when Gabe came back and she told him she was having trouble going down, they started arguing about whether or not they should add more weight. The thing is, no one knows who gave her the vest with more weight. It's not clear if Gabe took it, if maybe Tina did it without asking anyone, or if someone else gave it to him. What needs to be said at this point is that, either way, Tina was wearing a vest that she shouldn't have been using because it was too heavy. When they got back on the boat, before fixing the navigation computer, an assistant who was on board said that Gabe and Tina came out of the water looking a little red and with watery eyes. Maybe there was even a bit of panic on Tina's face, something that definitely caught her attention, but she didn't say anything and let them go anyway. Panic is a pretty big deal when it comes to diving, and she probably shouldn't have let her go if she saw panic on her face. 15 minutes later than they had planned, they finally went down to the dive site. From this point on, we only had Gabe's account of what happened, since there was no one else around. Down there, it was actually just the two of them, that same group, and nearby, some others from another boat called Jazz 2 were starting to descend. But they were still far away, so they couldn't see anything. Gabe and Tina descend about 10 meters to see the wreck. They get about 4 meters closer, which takes them around 3 minutes. Altogether, and for about a minute, they head south, just as the group from the other nearby boat starts to descend. According to Gabe, the current that day was pretty strong. In fact, stronger than he expected, and stronger than what he could normally handle. He realized from the moment he descended that the situation was not good at all. Once they're near the wreck, Tina moves away a bit, and when she comes back, she signals to Gabe that she wants to go back up. And this is where the problem starts. Gabe tries to ascend with Tina using the rope I mentioned, and when he looks down, he sees that Tina can't hold on. She can't go up. It was like she kept sinking lower and lower instead of actually being able to float. So he decided to let go of her for a second so he could use her vest to inflate it and help her. By the way, this vest is pretty useful when diving because when it's inflated, it also helps support some of the weight of the gas tanks, the oxygen tanks. So if he inflated it for her, he could support her weight better and help her get up as well. When he let go of Tina, he thought she would do the same thing, that she would inflate her vest. However, when he looked at her again, he saw that she was sinking lower and lower, and that she really wasn't able to inflate it. He then tried to go down to where Tina was, but he couldn't do it because she was going down too fast. Faster than he was able to go. What clearly would have worked is if he had just inflated Tina's vest first, but he didn't do that. What we can say about this is that we don't know how someone will act in situations like this. We don't know how a person in a panic will act when it comes to saving someone else. However, as I said before, he was certified to do this and should have acted calmly. But he didn't. He said he couldn't go down far enough to grab her, and that he tried several times, but all he could see was her reaching her arms out toward him as she sank. At one point, he managed to get closer, but Tina started flailing her arms frantically and ended up knocking off his mask, so he had to let go of her again and try to put his mask back on before too much water got in. At the same time, he managed to grab his spare regulator and take a breath of air. When he leaned in again to try to grab his wife, she had already sunk much farther down. He tried to go after her, shouting her name through the mask, but he couldn't reach her. All he could see was Tina still reaching her arms out, waiting for him to help her. She was too heavy and he couldn't reach her anymore, so he decided to do something completely different. Like I said before, in diving, you don't just leave someone there, it's both of you together the whole time. He shouldn't have done what he did, but anyway, according to him, he panicked at that moment and just decided to go get help. So he decided to shoot up to the surface as fast as he could. He came up so fast that he even says he hurt his ear as he shot through the water. Again, according to him and what he describes about those moments, he saw two divers in the water and tried to wave at them and point to where his wife was so they could go help her. He tried to tell them she was in danger. However, they didn't understand anything, and they didn't go to help her, so he decided to keep going up to the surface and ask for help on the boat. When he reached the surface, a total of 7 minutes had passed during this whole ordeal. These divers that Gabe supposedly waved at don't remember anything, as if it never happened. But it's important to highlight the following. This case was analyzed by diving experts, people with years of experience in incidents like this. And let's just say that the standard procedure for situations like this is to swim down with just a few kicks, not even that many, to reach the person, inflate their vest, release their weights, and bring them up to the surface. That's the standard procedure, and the one Gabe was supposedly trained to do. I'll say it again, he was certified in rescue, so he should have known all of this. He had done more than 50 trips like this, and had been given the instructions countless times. It would have been impossible for him not to know what he needed to do at that moment, which, well, we'll discuss a bit later because there are a few contradictions in all of this. Once on the surface, Gabe alerts a crew member, who also calls for emergency help, contacting the other boat nearby, the Jazz 2. Both boats then start preparing a rescue team to go down to where Tina was. While all this was happening, Wade Singleton, the trip director, was down below with another group of people. In fact, he was with the trip photographer, who also took some pretty important photos of this occasion. Suddenly, he looks to his side and sees the person lying at the bottom of the ocean. So, what was happening and what was this person doing? He gets a little closer and sees that the woman has her eyes open, looking upward, and her body is stiff. At that moment, he knew something was wrong, so he approached and began performing emergency procedures, the ones Gabe should have done. Wade put his arm over Tina's right arm and placed his hand on the regulator to press the purge button so that air would enter her mouth. He used his left arm to support Tina's head so he could inflate the vest. On the other hand, there's also the weight of this vest. He saw that it was too heavy, much heavier than it should have been, and that the weights were integrated into the vest. So he decided to take off his weight belt and, with everything inflated, head up to the surface. He picked her up in his arms, held her close, and together they floated up, just like Gabe should have done. Gabe was in the water for a total of 7 minutes before he surfaced. Tina 10. Which means that while he was coming up, Wade was already rescuing her and was coming up with him. Thanks to Wade's actions, they managed to get Tina to the surface in no time. She even reached the surface faster than Gabe did on his own. For some reason that we'll discuss later, Tina was closer to the Jazz 2 than to the boat they had come on. So they brought her onto this boat and tried to resuscitate her for 40 minutes. The first thing they noticed was that there didn't seem to be any water coming out of her mouth, which doesn't match with drowning. She had a little bit of vomit, just a small amount in her mouth, and actually there was also a bit of foam coming out, but again, very little. She also had her mask and regulator completely on. There was no issue in that regard. While they were trying to resuscitate her, Gabe was on the other boat and didn't ask at all to be taken to where his wife was. He didn't want to know anything about it. He stayed away and was with the friends they'd met on that boat, telling them it was a horrible situation and that he felt really bad. Unfortunately, 40 minutes of resuscitation efforts went by without Tina responding. So she was declared dead at 11:21 a.m., an hour after getting ready to dive. When he got the news that his wife was dead, Gabe began to cry uncontrollably. At that moment, he finally asked to be taken to the boat to see his wife. The rest of the groups who were diving nearby weren't really aware of what was happening. Some just knew there was some kind of problem with a person, but they didn't know someone had died. So everyone else kept diving as if nothing happened. The idea wasn't for everyone to panic and stop diving either. Someone even went and returned Wade's weight belt to him, which was still at the bottom of the ocean, as if nothing had happened. On the way back, the passengers described Gabe as someone who didn't seem like he'd just lost his wife. Or that he made some pretty inappropriate comments. Like, for example, he actually said, "This sucks," as if something minor had happened, you know? Although it's also worth mentioning that there were people who described him as someone who really looked bad, like someone who was suffering. But anyway, it was, let's say, about half and half. Some people saw him one way and others saw him differently. When it came time to tell the police what happened, there were some changes in the story, but not too many, and nothing that would suggest the story was fake. At first, he said he couldn't rescue Tina because of the weight he was carrying, but later he corrected himself and said it was because of the current. The worst part of all this, though, was the fact that he, being a certified rescue diver, wasn't able to save her. Let's just say, with all his experience, he should have done the same thing Wade did, but he didn't. But the big question was this: how did she die? She still had her mask on, her regulator was perfectly in place, the vomit didn't indicate that she had died from vomiting, and the foam didn't point to anything related to her death either. The only possibility that seemed likely was that her air supply had been cut off, that someone had turned the tank valve so no more air could reach her mask. But this couldn't be proven, since the tank valve that let air through was open. When Gabe arrives at the police station to give his statement, he decides to call his father and tell him what happened. During this call, he says that he had hurt his ears, something he actually hadn't mentioned before until that moment. Next to him was Paula, one of the women from the couples they had met, and she heard him say this and thought that he had never mentioned it before. The whole ear thing seemed pretty strange to her from the very beginning, since she had been with him the entire time, had comforted him, had listened to everything he had to say, and he had never mentioned anything like that. That particular detail made her suspect that there was more to the story than he had mentioned. During the call he had with his father, he asked him to be the one to tell Tina's father what had happened. So it was Tina's father. Gabe's father was the one who broke the news to him. Tina's father, Tommy, was away at a business conference. He was in another state, so he wasn't expecting what he was about to hear. The moment he answered the call and was told that his daughter had died, he fell to his knees and was left speechless. Obviously, in that state of shock, he didn't ask for explanations about what had happened. He didn't ask for much information about how. It was all about focusing on his daughter and his family and having to tell them what had happened. After telling him what had happened, Gabe's father handed the phone to the pastor, the same pastor who had married Tommy and Gabe. Tommy asked this man not to say a word, not to call the family, because he wanted to be the one to tell them what had happened. So the pastor told him it was all right, that he wouldn't tell anyone. However, by this point, everyone in the area where they lived had already heard the news. Once the call was over, Tommy got ready to catch a flight to Alabama, back home. Unfortunately, while he was waiting for his flight, his other daughter called him crying, asking him to explain what had happened. It turns out she had arrived at work and all her coworkers already knew what had happened. So one way or another, she found out before the rest of her family. They had to drive her home, and that's when she called Tommy to ask for more information about what had happened. He, of course, didn't know a thing. But one of the strangest things happening at this moment is that Tommy starts to realize who knew about the news and who had found out before he did. It turns out that Gabe's mother was already at the airport in Alabama, waiting for a flight to Australia to see her son. She was already at the airport, already had a flight to Australia, and already had a visa, which seemed way too fast to him. There are express visas, but this is just over the top. By the time he found out about the news, Gabe's mother was already on her way to Australia. At that moment, he wondered how long this woman had known about it. Beyond that, Tommy takes the flight to Alabama, and when he gets home, he meets up with his family and they grab the phone to call the Australian consulate. He needed to get in touch with Gabe, but Gabe wasn't answering his calls, and neither was Gabe's father. They had completely ignored all his messages, and he needed answers. So after hours on the phone, the consulate finally managed to connect him with Gabe, who answered and started to explain what had happened, at least according to his version. At this point, they had no suspicion about how it had happened. I suppose at that moment, they must have thought maybe her heart condition couldn't handle the diving. Maybe there had been some kind of accident, but they didn't think Gabe had anything to do with their daughter's death. Then Tina's mother answered him on the phone, telling him it wasn't his fault. She asked if he was okay, if he was recovering well from the incident. She really didn't think he had anything to do with it. She just thought he was a victim. He had just lost his wife, and she was showing a lot of empathy. On top of that, he made them feel guilty because he explained that he was left with this image in his mind of his wife falling into the water, looking him straight in the eyes as she died. So, the mother definitely felt very guilty about it. However, Gabe lied to them. While the part about her looking at him as she fell was probably true, the rest of what he told them was a lie. It turns out that Tina's family asked him over the phone if he had stayed with her during the time they were trying to resuscitate her. They asked him if he was with her, calling out her name, holding her while they were performing resuscitation, and he said yes, that he was right by her side, that he had shouted her name. A bunch of lies, because in reality, he was on the other boat not wanting to go see her. Beyond all that, let's move on to the autopsy and what really caused her death, even though it couldn't be completely determined how it happened. So the situation was more a process of elimination. Her death wasn't caused by the heart condition she had, so that was ruled out. It also wasn't caused by any marine animal attacking her or anything like that. So the only thing left was that she had drowned, but without water. What remained to figure out was whether it was accidental or intentional, if someone had caused her to drown. And as I said before, the most widely considered option was that someone had cut off the oxygen from the tanks to her mask. What had happened? The valve was properly in place, the diving equipment was perfect, it was in perfect condition, so it couldn't have been that. The real question was that. How did it happen? How did she drown? What could have caused it if it wasn't her heart condition? Nor did she choke on her own vomit. What could it have been? How did it happen? And who did it? Because someone would have had to turn the valve on her oxygen tanks. So how is that possible? Besides, you have to remember that it takes time. It's not as easy as just pressing a button. That takes time on one hand, and then it takes time for the person to drown, for them to run out of oxygen. After the investigation began, and while still in Australia, he asked the police to be interviewed again. He wanted to clear up a few things. First of all, he said that his wife had never been offered that kind of guidance that Wade kept talking about, and besides, his certification for rescuing people didn't include unconscious individuals. We'll take a closer look at what he said here later, but basically, he wanted to defend himself against the accusations being made against him. As for the funeral, when Tina's body was brought back to the United States, everything was a mess. Gabe's family took care of absolutely everything and didn't want to give any responsibility to Tina's family. Honestly, I don't understand why that happened. I still don't get it to this day, because there was no real reason for it. Since he was the husband, Gabe had full responsibility for the funeral. But he could have easily signed a power of attorney so that Tina's family could take care of it. In fact, they asked him to, but he refused. He even tried to avoid Tommy as much as he could. When he arrived at the Alabama airport, Tommy was waiting there to ask him for an explanation and to say hello. And when Gabe arrived at the Alabama airport, he said his ear hurt and they had to take him to the hospital to make sure everything was okay. And by the way, everything was fine. In other words, he had just done it so he wouldn't have to see Tina's father. At the same time, the couples they had met on the ship were suspicious of Gabe and wanted to talk to Tommy to tell him about his daughter and what had happened. So in order not to seem insensitive or disrespectful to the family, they decided to simply leave a message with the funeral director so that he could respond when the time was right. The message was as follows: "If you want to talk to someone or some of the people who were on the boat, we would be more than happy to talk to you." Tommy eventually responded to the message and got in touch with them to get a bit more information, which later turned out to be very useful. The funeral went by with some tension between the families, but without any major incidents. The only problem in all of this was Gabe and his strange behavior. Completely out of line. He was a pretty strange guy, what can I say? Look, first of all, to one of Tina's friends, who was there mourning her loss, he showed her a picture of Tina in front of a warning sign, "Dangerous Tides," a sign warning that someone could drown. Totally out of place, something that's just disrespectful at a funeral. And on top of that, he was also making comments to Tina's friends, kinda Disrespectful. I'm not gonna repeat them or anything like that, but they were disrespectful. Still, Gabe's family defended him regarding his behavior, saying that, according to them, he had always been that way. He had a rather strange sense of humor, a bit peculiar, you could say. So then, after this funeral, Gabe started taking action regarding the life insurance and travel insurance policies he had taken out. Since Tina hadn't gotten around to changing the life insurance, she was supposed to receive $34,000 a year for her death, which would be like an annual salary. And besides, the only beneficiary was Tommy, her father. So Gabe wanted the highest insurance payout. He wanted the policy that would give him all the money, $175,000 in total. But that didn't work out for him at all, since Tommy had foreseen all of this. He hadn't foreseen his daughter's death, but he had figured out that Gabe had some ulterior motives. What he also did before the honeymoon was take out a travel insurance policy that supposedly covered deaths. The thing is, he didn't know that it didn't cover deaths from diving. He only found this out when she tried to claim the insurance. On top of all this, Tina had a mortgage debt of $12,000 and $5,000 for her funeral. Clearly, Gabe's main defense was that he wouldn't kill his wife just for $34,000 when he owed so much money because of her death. And because of the mortgage. However, we have to remember that he didn't know they hadn't changed the life insurance, so he thought he would have $175,000 to spend. While he was trying to claim some kind of insurance, Tommy, on his end, was looking for help from people experienced in diving. He wanted to understand a bit more about what had happened from a professional perspective, so he decided to get in touch with the couple who had spoken to him, with these two couples who had left him a message at the funeral. One of these people was Kenneth Snyder, a 60-year-old man who had spent many of those years diving, so he had the experience and knew how someone should act in the circumstances Gabe was in. He explained to Tommy that the story Gabe was telling didn't seem normal. The main thing he told him was that a person who's drowning doesn't just reach out their arms, they desperately try to swim to the surface, so Tina would have been kicking upwards, trying to get up. And she wouldn't have just been sinking down, staring at Gabe. Also, the dive computer he had on his wrist clearly showed how deep Gabe had gone, and it didn't match up with the depth Tina would have been descending to. He didn't really go down to try to rescue her like he said. He didn't try several times. He went down to a certain point and then came back up. And on top of that, like I said before, he did it slowly. I mean, he took his time, and at that moment, Wade surfaced faster than he did. Because of everything Kenneth told him, Tommy decided to travel to Australia to meet face-to-face with the person who had saved his daughter, or at least tried to rescue her. That person was Wade Singleton, the director of the trip. And that's when he found out that Gabe had lied to them directly, that he hadn't been with his daughter until the very end, and that he had stayed away, hadn't said her name, and wasn't there to witness her being rescued. He lied to him about absolutely everything. With the forensic examination, the analysis of the diving equipment Tina was using, and the testimonies of various experienced divers, a case was opened, a criminal investigation, 9 months later. They did everything they could in terms of evidence about what had happened. They made 3D models, and there were even people directly testing whether it was physically possible to do. In the water, they tested what Gabe had described to see if the story could have happened the way he said it did. In fact, one of the biggest pieces of evidence that something in his story wasn't true is that the photo taken of the body by the trip's photographer, who was taking pictures underwater, showed the exact location where Wade had found her, which means it was 16 meters from the wreck. Look, Tina and Gabe were descending directly toward the wreck, and supposedly Tina hadn't strayed too far. That is, she was heading straight back to where the line was to ascend, which means that at no point could she have gotten 16 meters away and ended up where Wade found her. Clearly, in that part, he had lied, but he had also lied about alerting 2 divers who were in the water. The police and investigators tried to get statements from everyone who was there at that time. There were tons of people from all over the world, since this cruise is taken by a lot of tourists. They questioned each one of them, and none of these people remembered seeing a man alerting anyone. No one recalled being shaken by Gabe, nor did they remember seeing him nearby. On the other hand, Tina had more than twice the amount of weight she needed in her vest. Normally, you have a little bit of weight to help you sink, but having more than half the necessary weight actually makes it really hard to come back up. Therefore, even if she had inflated her vest, she wouldn't have been able to come up on her own. Here's the thing, who gave her that vest? Who gave her so much weight? Who let her go down like that? Because of this, people started to get a little more suspicious of Gabe. And then an expert named Michael McFadden appears, who was also a very experienced diver, and he didn't think it was possible that Gabe was the culprit. According to him, to turn off the oxygen would take about a minute, then another 30 seconds before the person would start to panic and run out of air, and only then would they lose consciousness. Then, once the person was already unconscious and falling, he would have to open the valve again right away, so as not to raise suspicion. So all of that would take a certain amount of time, which according to him wouldn't have been enough. Besides this, he also pointed out that Tina had very little air left in her tank, and that she could have passed out simply from breathing too much during a panic attack underwater. We have a testimony from someone who supposedly saw her in a state of panic, who thought she seemed panicked before getting into the water. So this man said that maybe during that panic attack, she started breathing very quickly, used up a lot of air, ran out, and passed out. Let's say that if Gabe had closed the oxygen valve, then there would actually be more oxygen left in the tank, not less. But the inconsistencies in Gabe's story were still there, and he had already told lies. He lied about how quickly he got out of the water. He didn't rupture an eardrum or anything like he said before. And the dive computer also showed that he had ascended at a normal speed. It wasn't the fastest descent of his life, not even close. And on top of everything, the worst thing he did was deliberately lie to the police. He had gone to give another statement, and in that statement, he said his certifications weren't for dealing with unconscious people, but when they checked the certifications he had, they actually were for handling unconscious people. In fact, it was easy to prove. You could see in his certifications that he had specifically studied for that and had passed the exam. So, Gabe was fully capable of rescuing unconscious people. But there's still a big problem, and it's not Gabe's fault. The travel company, the diving company that was supposedly supervising them, let the two of them go alone together, which is pretty normal for experienced people, but it's definitely not normal when one person barely knows anything about diving. Tina had only gone on 5 dives, and some of those had been cut short because she panicked underwater. While some areas are more dangerous than others, Tina was supposed to have a class where they explained everything she needed to know, and she should have gone out with an instructor, not her partner, who had no certification to teach or supervise, which was really the important thing. She needed supervision wherever she went because she really didn't know what she was doing, and even less so, she had no idea how to dive in open ocean. So the company acted wrongly in that regard. Even so, there was another problem in this situation, which was that Gabe had actually done more than 50 dives, but only 13 of them had been unsupervised, and only 15 had been in open ocean. Those were also with supervision. In other words, he wasn't really experienced enough for the two of them to go down alone. But the trip director didn't ask about that specifically. He saw the number of dives, but didn't ask whether they had been supervised or unsupervised. He didn't ask for more details, so he just let them go without further questions. He let them go without more, and without asking enough questions, which was exactly what the interviews were for. That is, even though Gabe was certified to rescue unconscious people, if it was an open ocean in an area he didn't know or wasn't familiar enough with, then maybe he wouldn't know how to act in that situation. On top of all that, every diver have a logbook where they record each dive they've done, with all the details, which meant that Tina had written there that she had interrupted dives because of panic, yet Wade still let her go. It's true that he did suggest she take an orientation anyway, but even so, he let them go off alone, just the two of them, without a supervisor. The company also made several other mistakes regarding safety. Each diver's tank was supposed to have the specific color for their category. That way, it would be easier to tell who was more experienced from those who were just starting out. They didn't have any color at all. The forms the couple was made to sign weren't filled out properly, and Gabe also didn't have the certification to be her instructor. Even so, they still let him go alone. But worst of all is that Tina was supposed to sign some papers stating that she understood the risks of diving and that the company wasn't responsible for certain things. They never gave him those papers. Still, it could be considered that Gabe knew about Tina's anxiety and decided to use it to his advantage to ensure her death. A year after the events, Tina's family began to claim that her death hadn't been an accident. They had several things against Gabe, mostly because of his behavior, but also because someone had been removing the flowers from Tina's grave. They believed it was Gabe, mainly because they had recently requested to move Tina's grave to a plot that belonged to him. In other words, Gabe's family suddenly requested to move Tina's grave to another location, which didn't make any sense, but they could easily do it because Gabe was her husband and had everything needed to make it happen. He didn't need to sign any paperwork, and it was under his control. Basically, he could do whatever he wanted. What was surprising was that after moving her to this plot owned by Gabe's family, the flowers kept disappearing. Tommy would go with Tina's sister and mother to leave flowers for her, and suddenly they would disappear. The police investigator in charge of the case decided to look into this a bit more and went to the grave to wait for days with a camera to see who was responsible. It was none other than Gabe. He would show up at the grave, grab a wire, and remove the flowers that the family had left from the box where they were cacked. He would then throw them out onto the street as if they were nothing. According to Gabe's lawyer, he only did it because they were plastic, and he knew Tina didn't like them, so he decided to just throw them away, even though they were from her family. Later, he stated that he did it because he didn't like the family's attitude toward him, since they called him a murderer, so he would get rid of the flowers they sent. Because of this, his behavior became more and more suspicious. Besides this, during that time, investigators were able to confirm that turning the oxygen off and then back on was possible. That during the time he was underwater, it was entirely possible to turn off Tina's oxygen, turn it back on, and then surface. On the other hand, he kept trying for years to collect the life insurance and travel insurance payouts. In fact, he even went to court to try to get these payouts. He wouldn't stop at anything until a judge told him to quit, or he would look suspicious in his wife's death case. He wanted to be reimbursed for absolutely everything: travel expenses, medical bills, phone calls, credit card charges, transportation, and emotional distress. All of that until a judge denied his claims. Fortunately, the Australian police never gave up, and even flew to Alabama to look for more clues, close to the family and to Gabe. That's how they managed to find a few witnesses about some rather uncomfortable situations in the relationship, or rather controlling behaviors from Gabe. The first situation had to do with the engagement ring that Gabe had bought. It turns out he showed it to Tina and told her she couldn't touch it or even look at it, or he would return it. In fact, he said he would only give it to her once he was ready. But there's another situation that's even worse and really crosses a line. The situation takes place in a pizzeria. Tina goes into this place to order a pizza, and when she comes out, Gabe is not happy at all. Apparently, she hadn't done things the way he wanted. She had to do them exactly the way he wanted. So then he goes into the pizzeria, orders another pizza, and when he comes out, he throws it at Tina. There were several witnesses to this situation, and in fact, her friends weren't surprised at all. Of course, her father knew all about this. Tina would tell him things, and obviously, he didn't like Gabe at all. There were also two possible motives for why he might want to kill Tina. One of them was the life insurance, and the other was a possible affair. It turns out that before they got engaged, before Gabe proposed, they had broken up. Tina was not happy at all with the relationship and didn't want anything more to do with it. So a friend suggested she'd distract herself, that she'd go out with someone else to see if she really wanted to be in a relationship or not. Or maybe she just wanted to break up with Gabe for good. At least so she could make a decision. So this friend suggested to Tina that they take a trip to where her cousin lived. That way, they could spend a weekend together. When Tina comes back, she tells her friend that she really didn't want to be with Gabe anymore, that she realized the relationship wasn't working, but apparently Gabe also found out about that weekend with someone else. When he finds out about this, he proposes to Tina. They hadn't gotten back together or anything like that. He just gets mad and proposes to her. And I say he got mad because the friends witnessed it, and then a whole argument started about the weekend she had spent with someone else when they weren't even together anymore. Honestly, none of Tina's friends could understand why she got back together with him, but she did and accepted the proposal. The friend who introduced her to the cousin even asked if she was really sure after everything she had said, and she answered yes. She was a little unsure, but she wanted to get married. Several years went by with investigations and legal conflicts between Australia and the United States. And now it was 2007. Gabe was in a new relationship. He was with another girl who looked a lot like Tina, actually. She was blonde. She had a very similar face, and he had met her back in high school. It turns out that during that time, they had started seeing each other again, and it seems she didn't care about his past and also respected the fact that he had a deceased wife. Gabe would say, whenever people asked, that his new girlfriend even let him keep photos of Tina around the house because she understood that Tina had been a part of his life and that he had loved her very much. Eventually, during that time, a trial was held in Australia, which Gabe didn't want to attend for a long time. He fought with his lawyer for months to avoid having to go, until one day he simply said he would attend. During this trial, they used the testimonies and the investigation that had been done regarding what could happen underwater. Gabe attended the trial, and before the defense could even begin, he pled guilty to manslaughter. He didn't want to say that he had planned to kill his wife, but rather that he was guilty of not having done enough to save her. His original sentence for this would have been 4 years, but it was later reduced to just 12 months. There was a lot of debate about this. Some said it should be less, others said it should be more, so it was settled at 18 months. The thing is, by 2010, he was supposed to be released and had to return to the United States, but another trial was waiting for him there. He had to go to another court and receive another sentence. The only problem during this time was that Alabama had the death penalty, while Australia did not. So in order to send Gabe back to the United States, they had to wait 3 weeks for them to sign an agreement stating they wouldn't seek the death penalty, since it didn't exist in Australia. That's when, on November 25th, 2010, Gabe was charged with capital murder and kidnapping by deception. His lawyer managed to get him released from the kidnapping by deception charge on a $100,000 bond, with the extra requirement that he wear a monitoring device and observe a curfew. The murder trial was different. There was evidence that Gabe had removed the flowers from the grave, there were testimonies, and there was physical evidence of what was possible underwater. So, in February 2012, the trial officially began in Alabama. In this trial, all the testimonies were used, including the testimony of a friend of Gabe's who had done the certification with him to rescue unconscious people from the water. They had evidence of absolutely everything, and then something completely unexpected happened. Gabe's defense requested, before presenting any evidence in his favor, that the case be dismissed. This is actually something that happens all the time. It's pretty common. And it's usually requested just in case, and it's normally denied, but this time the judge decided to dismiss the case. Normally, there's no hope that it will happen, but this time he simply said there wasn't enough evidence to find him guilty of such a thing. He said the evidence wasn't enough to declare that he had intended to kill Tina. So let's say he was set free after this trial. He had to pay bail, he had to wear a monitoring device for a while, but he wasn't found guilty. Some people still think this is wrong, that the outcome of the trial was incorrect. And it was taken into account that Gabe had lied throughout the whole case. It would be one thing if he really had no intention of killing her and had told the whole truth. But every time he told the story, something was off. Something was off. He lied about everything he did. Why would he do that? There was really no need to lie about anything. It didn't make any difference whether he went fast or if he was careful. He could have just said that he took classes to get certified in rescuing unconscious people, because he could have defended himself by saying he was under a lot of pressure and didn't know what to do. There really was no need to go to the police to clarify that he hadn't gotten certified in rescuing unconscious people, which on top of that was a lie. He made sure to get travel insurance that he believed at the time would cover deaths, and he also asked Tina to increase her life insurance and to name him as the sole beneficiary. Maybe he was just a bad person in general, but maybe he wasn't to blame for what happened to Tina. Or maybe he planned everything and just got away with it. He spent 1.5 years in jail and then left. I don't know, that's where justice ended. Tell me what you think about this case. It was incredibly long. I hope you watched the whole thing if you made it this far. Congratulations! Leave your thoughts below. It's interesting to discuss what you all think really happened. If you know anything else, please leave it in the comments. If you know another part of the story, share it below. And that's finally the end of the video, so, well, I don't have anything else to say. Over here on the side are my Patreons. If you want to know more about that, there's a link in the description below. Sorry if I'm posting videos late, it's just that with this whole move and a bunch of things I had to sort out, everything got delayed. Absolutely everything. So yeah, from now on, Work, work, work. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the investigation. Here you have a new video, and here you have a recommended video. You can subscribe by clicking on my face. And I really appreciate you watching and supporting me in every video. The last few videos have been getting a ton of views too. They were really interesting, in my humble opinion. So I hope you all liked them too. See you in another video. Goodbye.